What if I told you that right now, in unmarked buildings across Europe and the Middle East, American and Iranian officials are sitting across from each other, negotiating deals that could either prevent World War III or trigger the largest regional conflict since 1945? What if these conversations, happening in complete secrecy, involve nuclear weapons, military alliances that would shock the world, and agreements that could make Israel's worst nightmares come true? And what if everything you've been told about the Iran-US relationship for the past 45 years has been nothing but theater, while the real game was always being played behind closed doors? Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you see the Middle East forever. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Right now, as you're watching this video, intelligence agencies across 3 continents are in absolute chaos. Leaked diplomatic cables, intercepted communications, and reports from deep cover assets have exposed something extraordinary. The United States and Iran, sworn enemies since 1979, nations that have spent decades threatening each other with total destruction, are engaged in the most significant secret negotiations in modern Middle Eastern history. These aren't preliminary talks. These aren't exploratory discussions. These are advanced, detailed negotiations that involve nuclear programs, military withdrawal from key territories, economic sanctions worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and security guarantees that could completely redraw the power map of the entire region. But here's what makes this absolutely terrifying for some and hopeful for others. Both sides are negotiating as if they're running out of time, as if some invisible deadline is approaching that we don't yet understand. The intelligence community calls these negotiations track 2 diplomacy, but that sanitized term doesn't capture what's really happening. According to sources within European foreign ministries, American negotiators have met with Iranian counterparts at least 17 times in the past 8 months. These meetings haven't taken place in Geneva or Vienna, where previous nuclear talks occurred. They've happened in Muscat, Oman. They've happened in undisclosed locations in Switzerland. They've even happened, according to one unconfirmed but credible report, in a secure facility in Baghdad, protected by both American Special Forces and Iranian Revolutionary Guard units, working together for the first time since the Iran-Iraq War. Think about that for a moment. American Delta Force operators and Iranian Quds Force commanders, 2 groups that have spent 20 years trying to kill each other across Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, standing guard together while their political masters negotiate inside. If that doesn't tell you how serious this is, nothing will. But what exactly are they negotiating? This is where it gets complex, and this is where the future of the Middle East hangs in the balance. According to leaked summaries that have reached certain defense analysts, the core of these talks involves a grand bargain, a comprehensive deal that addresses every major point of conflict between Washington and Tehran simultaneously. On the nuclear front, Iran is reportedly willing to accept permanent limitations on its enrichment program, limits that go beyond anything they agreed to in the 2015 JCPOA nuclear deal that President Trump later abandoned. We're talking about enrichment caps at 3.67%, far below weapons grade levels. We're talking about enhanced IAEA inspections with virtually no restrictions. We're talking about Iran dismantling advanced centrifuge cascades that took them 20 years to build. In exchange, the United States would lift all sanctions, not just nuclear-related sanctions, but terrorism sanctions, human rights sanctions, every economic restriction placed on Iran since 1979. Iranian oil would flood back into global markets. Iranian banks would reconnect to suborder IFT. Hundreds of billions in frozen assets would be released immediately. But the nuclear issue is just the beginning, and honestly, it might be the easiest part of this negotiation. The real complexity, the real danger, lies in what intelligence analysts call the regional security architecture. Here's what that means in plain language. Iran controls, influences, or directly commands militia forces across 5 countries: Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Shia militias in Iraq, Assad's forces in Syria, and Hamas elements in Gaza. These groups represent Iran's forward defense strategy, its way of projecting power without risking direct confrontation with the United States or Israel. For decades, American policy has demanded that Iran completely withdraw support from these groups, dismantle its network of proxies, and abandon its allies. Iran has always refused because doing so would leave it defenseless and isolated. But according to these secret negotiations, a compromise is emerging that would shock the world. Iran would agree to what diplomats call strategic restraint. It wouldn't abandon Hezbollah, the Houthis, or its Iraqi allies, but it would fundamentally change how these groups operate. Hezbollah would transform from an offensive military force aimed at Israel into a purely defensive force aimed at protecting Lebanon. The Houthis would end their attacks on Saudi Arabia and maritime shipping in exchange for a permanent ceasefire in Yemen. Iraqi militias would integrate into Iraq's official security forces under Baghdad's command, not Tehran's. Hamas, which receives limited Iranian support compared to other groups, would be left to negotiate its own arrangements with Israel and the Palestinian Authority. In exchange, the United States would recognize Iran's legitimate security interests in the region, would stop trying to overthrow the Iranian government through sanctions and covert operations, and would guarantee that no external power, meaning Israel or Saudi Arabia, would launch military strikes against Iranian territory or nuclear facilities. Now, before you think this sounds like a reasonable compromise, understand what this means for America's traditional allies in the region. Israel views Iranian influence in Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza as an existential threat. The idea that Hezbollah would remain armed, even in a defensive posture, is absolutely unacceptable to Israeli security doctrine. Israel's entire northern border strategy is built on the assumption that Hezbollah must eventually be destroyed or completely disarmed. A deal that legitimizes Hezbollah's existence, even under new constraints, would represent a fundamental American betrayal in Israeli eyes. Benjamin Netanyahu has already said publicly that Israel will never accept a nuclear Iran or an entrenched Iranian presence on its borders. If the United States signs a deal that allows both, even in modified form, the U.S.-Israel alliance, the cornerstone of American Middle East policy since 1967, could fracture in ways we've never seen before. Saudi Arabia faces a similar calculation, but from a different angle. For the Saudis, Iranian influence in Yemen, Iraq, and the broader Gulf region represents a direct challenge to Saudi regional dominance. The Saudi-Iranian rivalry isn't just political, it's religious, it's sectarian, it's civilizational. The Saudis have spent billions, maybe trillions when you count everything, trying to counter Iranian influence. They've fought a devastating war in Yemen specifically to prevent an Iranian-aligned government on their southern border. Now imagine American negotiators telling Riyadh that the Houthis, the group that has launched hundreds of missiles and drones at Saudi cities, will remain in power in Yemen as part of a U.S.-Iran deal. The Saudis would view this as a complete abandonment, a signal that America values DA-10 with Iran more than its 70-year alliance with the kingdom. This could push Saudi Arabia further into China's orbit, further away from American influence, and could accelerate Saudi Arabia's own nuclear program, because if Iran gets to keep its nuclear infrastructure under international monitoring, the Saudis will demand the same. But here's where this gets even more complicated, and this is the part that intelligence analysts are losing sleep over. These negotiations aren't happening in a vacuum. They're happening against the backdrop of a rapidly changing global order. America is pivoting to Asia to confront China, America is supporting Ukraine against Russia. America is dealing with potential conflict scenarios in Taiwan, the South China Sea, and the Korean Peninsula simultaneously. The United States military, for all its power, cannot maintain the same level of commitment in the Middle East that it held for the past 30 years. American policymakers understand this. They understand that permanent military presence in Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf is unsustainable when resources are needed elsewhere. A deal with Iran, even a controversial one, could allow the United States to dramatically reduce its Middle Eastern footprint, to pull back carrier groups, to withdraw troops, to save hundreds of billions in defense spending, all while maintaining influence through diplomacy rather than military force. Iran understands this calculation perfectly, and that's why Tehran is negotiating now. Iranian leaders know that this might be their best opportunity in generations to achieve security guarantees from Washington. They know that a different American administration, whether in 2025 or 2029, might take a much harder line. They know that Israel might launch military strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities before any deal is finalized. They know that internal instability, from economic collapse to popular protests, could weaken their negotiating position. So both sides are rushing. Both sides are compromising on issues they swore they'd never compromise on, because both sides believe the window is closing. But let me tell you what nobody is talking about publicly, the factor that might matter more than anything else: China. Over the past 5 years, while America was distracted by domestic politics and global crises, China has quietly become Iran's most important economic and strategic partner. China buys Iranian oil, sanctions or no sanctions. China invests in Iranian infrastructure through the Belt and Road Initiative. China provides Iran with technology, weapons, and diplomatic cover at the United Nations. If the United States doesn't reach an accommodation with Iran, China will continue to deepen its relationship with Tehran, will gain exclusive access to Iranian energy resources, will establish military facilities on the Persian Gulf, and will create a Beijing-Tehran axis that could dominate the entire Middle East. American negotiators understand this. They understand that keeping Iran in play diplomatically is the only way to prevent total Chinese dominance over the region's energy supplies and strategic waterways. Now, let's talk about what could go wrong, because there are about 1,000 ways these negotiations could collapse into disaster. First, leaks. The more people who know about these talks, the more likely that someone with an interest in sabotaging them will reveal details at the worst possible moment. Hardliners in Tehran, who view any accommodation with America as surrender, could leak information designed to embarrass the negotiators and derail the talks. Hardliners in Washington, who view Iran as an irredeemable enemy, could do exactly the same thing. Israeli intelligence, which has penetrated Iranian networks deeper than anyone else, could release information showing that Iran is cheating, building covert nuclear facilities, or maintaining offensive capabilities that violate the spirit of any agreement. One well-timed leak, one satellite photo, one intercepted communication, and the entire negotiation could collapse overnight. Second, violence. There are actors across the Middle East who benefit from U.S.-Iran confrontation and who would lose everything if relations normalized. Israeli hardliners who believe that Iran must be destroyed, not accommodated. Iranian hardliners who have built their power on anti-American ideology. Saudi elements who fear Iranian regional dominance. Sunni extremist groups who view Shia Iran as heretical. Any of these actors could launch an attack, a terrorist operation, an assassination, anything designed to provoke a crisis that makes continued negotiation impossible. Imagine Hezbollah, under orders from rogue IRGC commanders, launching a major attack on Israel during sensitive negotiations. Imagine an Iranian nuclear scientist assassinated by Mossad just as a deal is about to be finalized. Imagine a U.S. military convoy in Iraq attacked by militias who don't want American withdrawal. Any of these scenarios could trigger escalation spirals that make diplomacy impossible. Third, verification. Even if a deal is reached, how do you verify compliance? Iran has lied about its nuclear program before. Iran has built covert facilities before. Iran has smuggled weapons and technology in violation of agreements before. The IAE, the International Atomic Energy Agency, is good at what it does, but it's not omniscient. If Iran wants to maintain a covert nuclear capability or continue supporting proxies in ways that violate an agreement, detection would be difficult and prevention would be nearly impossible. And if violations are detected, what then? Do you reimpose sanctions? Do you launch military strikes? Do you declare the agreement void? Every verification challenge becomes a potential crisis point that could unravel everything. Fourth, domestic politics. In the United States, any major deal with Iran would face brutal opposition in Congress. Republicans would attack it as appeasement. Pro-Israel Democrats would question whether security guarantees are sufficient. The media would analyze every clause, every concession, every potential loophole. Presidential candidates would make opposing the deal a campaign centerpiece. Even if a president signs an agreement, the next administration could withdraw, exactly as Trump did with the JCPOA. In Iran, similar dynamics apply. Hardliners in the Revolutionary Guard, conservatives in the judiciary, religious authorities in Qom, all would scrutinize any deal for signs of weakness or surrender. If either government faces a domestic political crisis over the agreement, implementation could stall or collapse entirely. But despite all these risks, despite all these obstacles, the negotiations continue. That tells you something crucial. It tells you that both sides believe the alternative to a deal is worse than the risks of making one. For the United States, the alternative is permanent confrontation, endless military deployments, constant crisis management, and the eventual likelihood of major war. For Iran, the alternative is economic collapse, international isolation, potential military strikes, and possible regime change. Neither side wants those outcomes, so they negotiate, they compromise, they search for arrangements that both can live with, even if neither is happy about it. So, what happens next? Intelligence suggests that negotiations are approaching a critical phase. According to some reports, a framework agreement could be announced within the next 6 to 12 months. This wouldn't be a final comprehensive treaty, but rather an outline of core principles that both sides agree to pursue. Think of it like the framework that led to the 2015 nuclear deal, except much broader, covering not just nuclear issues, but regional security, economic relations, and political normalization. If a framework is announced, expect immediate and intense reactions from every direction. Israel will threaten independent military action. Saudi Arabia will demand equivalent security guarantees and nuclear technology. Hardliners in Tehran and Washington will denounce their own governments as traitors. International markets will react to the prospect of Iranian oil flooding global supplies. Every regional actor will recalculate their strategies based on the new reality. But here's the most important thing to understand. Whether these negotiations succeed or fail, they represent a fundamental truth about the Middle East right now. The old order is dying. The system that governed this region for decades, American military dominance, unchallenged Israeli security superiority, Saudi wealth translating into regional influence, that system is breaking down under the weight of changing global priorities, emerging powers, and unsustainable costs. Something new is emerging, and these secret talks between Washington and Tehran are part of that emergence. They might produce a stable new framework, or they might collapse and produce chaos. But either way, the Middle East you've known for your entire life is transforming into something different, something unpredictable, Something that could be more stable or vastly more dangerous depending on decisions being made right now in rooms we'll never see by people whose names we might never know. The next few months will be critical. Watch for signals. Watch for unexplained diplomatic travel. Watch for sudden changes in rhetoric from American or Iranian officials. Watch for Israeli military exercises or Saudi diplomatic initiatives that might signal preparation for a post-deal environment. Watch for oil prices because markets often know things before governments announce them. Most importantly, watch for violence because those who oppose these negotiations will try to sabotage them, and the most effective sabotage is the kind that creates facts on the ground that make diplomacy impossible. This is the most significant development in Middle Eastern geopolitics in a generation, and yet most people have no idea it's happening. That's intentional. Secrecy protects negotiations from pressure, from sabotage, from the kind of public scrutiny that makes compromise impossible. But secrecy also means that when deals are announced, when new realities emerge, the world will be shocked, unprepared, and forced to adapt to changes that were decided without public input or debate. That's the reality of high-stakes international diplomacy, and that's what makes this moment so dangerous and so important. If you've made it this far, you understand something that most people don't. You understand that the world is changing faster than the news cycle can track, that the most important developments often happen in secret, and that the Middle East you'll see in 5 years might look nothing like the Middle East of today. These secret Iran-US talks could prevent a catastrophic war, or they could trigger new conflicts we haven't imagined yet. They could stabilize the region for decades, or they could accelerate its fragmentation. Everything depends on decisions being made right now, and we won't know the outcomes until it's too late to influence them. Stay alert. Stay informed. Keep watching because this story is far from over, and what happens next will affect global security, energy markets, military deployments, and potentially the lives of millions of people across multiple continents. The Middle East is about to change forever, and these secret negotiations are the mechanism through which that change will occur, whether we're ready or not, whether we like it or not. The transformation has already begun.